Hello and welcome to another episode of The Open Government. I'm here with Vito De Simone, the author of the book, and it's going to be focused into failures. We talk about failures in governance. Tell me, define failure. What are you talking about here?
Well, failure is something that, we have to say that governments don't fail. They fail on purpose. It's their interest to fail. And so therefore, they do things, they organize things in a way that they are not compelled to fix it up or to prevent a failure. They do it basically on purpose.
Explain that. Why will a government want to fail?
Well, it doesn't mean that it's failing with the people. It is failing with other nations. There are conferences, and then they promise things, but they do not maintain their promises. They have treaties signed, and then they don't respect that. They just do something else.
Can you give us an example?
Well, I could give you an example of failure in treaties. For example, the U.S. spent a lot of money and time in having a treaty with Iran about the nuclear power, and enters Donald Trump, and he says, I don't like what it says here, and the treaty was nullified, was scrapped. So that is the way. The fact that previously the U.S. government had negotiated with Iran, there is also a provision there that people can get out. It's a voluntary thing. It's not something that compels. If you want to respect the treaty, fine. But if you don't want to, you can get out. For example, 1938, Germany signed a treaty with Russia saying that they would not go to war with the Russian people. Why? Because Germany did not want wars on two fronts, on the east with Russia and on west with France and England. So they signed a treaty on purpose just to hold the Russian. But the moment they had the opportunity to enter or to invade Russia, they did.
So they broke the treaty.
They broke this. It did not count. It did not count.
Right.
So when a treaty is mostly needed, people can violate it. So therefore, it's totally null. It's useless in a sense.
You also said on your book that governments use violence against their own people. Can you explain that and give us an example of what you're talking about?
Well, here it is, for example, Russia invades in 2014, even 2020. In fact, as we speak, there is war there. There's a violence there because, in effect, the government could have avoided going into war. There are other means of doing things. Even, for example, President Zelensky, he obviously had to stand the invasion, but he did not have to go to war against Russia because Russia is a larger, let's face it, it's a larger country, atomic bombs and all that. It has so many in advantage that Zelensky could have said, you come in, but we oppose everything you do. We as the citizens will not cooperate with you. Peaceful resistance is also another means of going against any other nation. You don't have to answer with war. There is always a possibility.
We're talking about Zelensky, Ukraine-Russia conflict. Let's say that somebody's listening to this years from now.
Yeah, sure. It is Russia and Ukraine, and Zelensky himself could have avoided by having a peaceful resistance. So you come in, we will not go to war. Look at the many people that we, or even the Ukrainian, would have saved. Now the whole country is devastated. many people, thousands of people are dead. We don't know yet because they keep it a secret. They don't tell us.
So who miscalculate that?
No,
Zelensky or the
there is
Russians?
no miscalculation. It was all on calculations.
Oh, it's-
Wars don't just happen because it happens.
So wait a
They
moment.
are
You're saying that this
calculating-
was planned
Say
in
it again?
advance. This was planned in advance.
It was planned. All wars are planned in advance. So nothing happens because of an accident. It's not true that something just happened and therefore no. It is planned for war, and therefore eventually they are waiting for an accident or for a pretext in order to go to war. Russia, of course, he says, I'm afraid that NATO was trying to gain more countries. Yeah, but if people want to go away, Russia could not say anything or should not say anything. But the fact is, they took an action, and the tragic thing is nobody can stop Russia. Nobody can stop the U.S. when the U.S. goes into Iraq on 2003, for example. There is no way that you can stop any country from invading another country. That's why, in a way, I wrote the Ovum government, because there is a possibility of containing wars or nations from going to war. Especially.
So that brings me to a previous subject that you touched. So all these conflicts are somebody's making a lot of money there.
Definitely. First of all, the military, they are trained all their lives to go to war. But not only that, but people who make weapons, for example,
You have to use them.
they have to use them. And not only that, but they make a lot of money. The weapons industry is the largest probably there is in the world. And not just the U.S., but everybody, every other nation either buys or makes weapons.
So what Ulysses
The politicians also. Sometimes the politicians are the people who are over-eager, and so they start a war because, that
what has Ulysses to do with the stealing and use of violence?
Well, Ulysses, as we know, is a very historic.
Who was Ulysses?
Well, Ulysses was a king of Ithaca in Greece, and Homer, the poet Homer, wrote about Ulysses and the invasion of Troy. So this happened maybe 8,000-9,000 years ago. So this is a very historic, and Ulysses still today is probably the hero that is mostly known throughout the Western world, and maybe even throughout the world. He was an astute person. He was a person of strength, and he was the one who invented or had the idea of having the horse of Troy, which then, after 10 years of war, it allowed some soldiers, his soldiers, to enter the city of Troy, finally, after 10 years, because Troy was really well fortified, they could not get in. Finally, with the stratagem of having a horse in honor of the god of the Trojans, they finally got in, and then they opened the door to get the rest of the Greeks in. And so they burned the town to the ashes.
So there you have it. I mean,
not only that, but Ulysses, you have to understand that he had 12 ships. He was not alone. He was the king. He had many soldiers with him. And he had 12 ships. As a result of the destroying of Troy, they had 12 ships full of gold and other valuables they stole and they found in Troy himself. So they went away, and of course it took them another 10 years to finally Ulysses to get to his Ithaca. And what happened is, the first step, he says, he went into another town. He left, he sailed, and then he wrote, and I want to quote this because I think it is important. You said what he has to do. It has to do because all the element that we are talking about, the cheating and stealing, is there with him already 9,000 years ago. So he says, and I'm quoting from my book, page 65, from the Ovum government, King Alcinous, who had found him on the beach, and then he cleaned him, he saved him, and then after a couple of days, they had a meeting in his court, in Alcinous' court, and then he asked, "What's your name? Where do you come from?" Obviously, and so Ulysses himself says the following: "I am Ulysses, son of Laertes. When I set sail from Troy, the wind took me first to Ismarus, which is the city of the Cicons. There I sacked the town and put the people to the sword. We took their wives and also much booty." So here he is a king, and what he does, after his boats, his ships are full of gold and valuables, he still gets into another town by sail, and he sacks, he actually rapes women, he gets everything. So there's the violence that a king himself should not have done it, but yet he does. But this does not just happen 9,000 years ago, it happens today. You know, World War II, if I may continue, to give a more recent example, in 1942, when the war ended, I saw it myself because I'm old enough to...
45.
In 1945, 48, yeah. 45, the American boats were putting on their boats all those antique statues, very valuable statues that Italy had because Italy had lost the war. They took them just by taking them. They did not respect the ownership or anything. Now they are the owners. Look at the Germans. The Germans took all the gold as soon as they entered into Belgium and France. They sacked all the banks and private people, and they got all the gold and got them aside from the gold. But then there is also the U.S. I know there was a film only a few years ago. I don't remember at the moment the film. But you can see in that film, an American film, how there was a specific specialized group of soldiers that went just after the gold and after the pictures, after the paintings and all that. So they still, even today, and if you remember only 2 or 3 years ago, Hillary Clinton received an email from one of his assistants and said that Libya, Gaddafi, had billions and billions of dollars in gold, and after the war, all that money, all that gold disappeared. We don't know where it went, whether it went to France or whether it went to the U.S., but it disappeared. This is today, even today, people steal like crazy. So they have no respect for anything. Once either you're president or not, it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Miracle of Santana?
Yeah, I think
it was the film, or Unbroken. Those are the films that the priest, this episode. But we can continue. And switching to the American Revolution a little bit. I mean, we went from Greece to World War II, and now we are in the American Revolution. Yeah, tell us why it was a failure, and in what way?
Well, obviously, the American Revolution gave us freedom and independence. You cannot take that away. You were really either lucky because there were wars between France and England at the time, but we did achieve that. It gave us that freedom and independence. However, if you think about it, from a peaceful world, we did not achieve peace there. We had independence, yes, but we did not have peace. Why? Because immediately after, we started making wars. Wars against France, no, not France, I'm sorry. A war of independence, world we said 1812, we started war.
With Mexico.
We had wars with Mexico, taking a lot of land. We had wars with Native Americans. Some people who did not want to belong to the U.S. They were eliminated. You could say that millions of people were taken away. Of course, the U.S. also bought land when they won, so they had this expansionistic policy that they wanted to gain the land.
Even Alaska, yeah.
Yeah, they went and they bought Alaska and they bought the Louisiana Purchase. That was a good thing. But the fact is that when they said, go west, the young man, the future was in trying to get the border from ocean to ocean. And that policy, in a way, swept everything else. The Mexicans paid, Spain paid, they all paid the prices for that of our expansionistic idea. So this is where the violence is.
And what about, going a little bit back, what about the French Revolution? What happened there?
Well, the French Revolution, as you may remember, was fought because they wanted liberté, fraternité, égalité. And what happened there? They did not achieve all those things. Napoleon came in, and there was the age of terror there. The poor French did not achieve peace at all. So where was this freedom and égalité when, in fact, there was no égalité among people? The rich people remained rich, maybe even richer, and the poor became poorer, the same.
Wow. And coming a little bit, and this is the last example, World War I ended, and we have the Paris Treaty in 1928.
Well, the Paris Treaty of 28, this is to show that nations have treaties, but they can violate them at every time or then enforce them at all. In this instance, they did not enforce what it was. And I like to read it because just a little section.
What are you going to read? The treaty itself? What are you
going to read? I'm reading from the treaty itself, Article 1 of the treaty, okay? And it says, the high contracting parties, now the parties are the U.S., Russia, France, England, Germany. These are all the big countries.
World War I.
Okay. This was after World War I, 1928. The high contracting parties solemnly swear in the names of their respective peoples, us, okay, that they condemn recourse to war for the solution of international controversies and renounce it as an instrument of national policy in their relationship with one another. That means they declare definitely, and this has nothing to do with not the UN, because that did not exist. The previous organization, which was I forget now at the moment, there was an organization, international organization, the League of Nations.
The League of Nations, you mean?
And the League of Nations, this treaty was signed apart from the League of Nations. So therefore, actually, even today, it's still valid. It can still be enforced. But by whom? Nobody does anything. There is Article 2, which also I will read it for you. It says, the settlement of resolution of disputes or conflicts shall never be sought except by pacific means. Here, before they said there's going to be no war, and now say only pacific means. And what happened? We have had World War II, we have Korea, we have had Vietnam, and only in the U.S.
And let me remind the audience of this podcast that this didn't happen so far away. It's just less than 100 years.
Less than 100 years. Yeah, definitely. You can go even up to today
right.
with the Ukrainian war.
But then after, okay, that was a failure. Then Germany got power again, and they invade Poland, World War II. And then after World War II, we have the United Nations. We solved everything. It's not a failure, right?
The United Nations, first one was the League of Nations, and sort of nobody enforced that. But they created the United Nations, again, to help people discuss, talk about it. Basically, it was the same thing as the League of Nations, only that now it was a better organized. But still, the countries themselves became members of the club of the United Nations, but they did not give the power to the UN to decide. They gave the power to 5 winning nations: the US, France, England, China, and Russia. These are today the owners of the world. And I say in my book is that before, when we had a dictator, if we could not remove him or her, we actually waited for his death to happen, and then we were finally free, and dignity was restored in a country. Today, there are 5 countries that, in effect, dominate the whole world.
And those are the 5 permanent members, correct?
Those are the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, and they should act in the interest of the world, the interest of internationally, but in the fact that they do their own interest. They don't care about other people. They veto any action that their country starts doing, and I could give you some examples if you like.
How many countries do we have in the whole world?
Well,
approximately.
They are still growing. I think 136.
And so 136 and plus, and we have only 5 countries controlling that?
Yeah.
That's amazing. Can you give us an example? Like, I mean, Argentina, you mentioned in your book.
Okay, Argentina.
1982.
In 1982, the Argentinians felt that that was the right moment to take by force the Falkland Islands, or the Malvinas, as the Argentinians call it. And so they took it from the English. Why? Because the English had taken the archipelago, or the islands, away from Argentina by force. They came in and they said, "Don't come back ever again." And so they put 4 or 5, few people there
to live there.
English people to live there, so that they can say it's their island. So the English took it by force, and so finally the Argentinian took it also by force. So what happened is that the Argentinian had thought that they could have taken it away from England, because England was no longer a world power anymore. Also, there in the U.S., we had the policy of the Monroe Doctrine, and we, or Argentinians, thought that perhaps the U.S. would come in favor of Argentina because we did not allow any other foreign country to come in. Now England had lost the island, so therefore they could not come in. Also, the Argentinian claimed that the islands, Falkland Islands, were part of Argentina. They were within the waters.
The platform, the sea platform.
And also the UN itself had a provision say that self-determining nations, in other words, the UN favors when a nation is being either a slave or dominated by another country and becomes free, that it's self-determining as a nation. They can declare to the UN that they are an independent nation, and they can do that. But in this aspect, It did not work that way because, first of all, the Americans did not favor Argentina. They favored the English, even though English was a European power. But they favored very much so by helping with the communications and even allowing them to get in Argentina. Argentina, another thing is, first of all, the English vetoed at the UN, because we're talking about the UN now.
They're one of the five Security
The first
Council.
thing the English did was vetoed the action that the proposal that Spain and another country had said, let's stop the war, let's stop this. And the English immediately vetoed. Okay, they were of their own interest, so they vetoed any action in the UN, and the UN became useless in a sense. They could not. The Argentinian claimed that those islands were part of their
Oceania platform.
Yeah, they're part of their borders. And you know what happened is only 18 years after the Argentinian request statement said that those islands belonged to the borders, to the Argentinian borders. 18 years after, the UN declared that yes, those islands belong to Argentina. But even today, what has happened? Absolutely nothing. The English still own those islands, and
so that's another failure from the UN.
That's another.
And what happened to? I will take you a little bit further. So that's failure number one. We go to Iraq. United States invaded Iraq in 2003.
In 2003, what happened is that the U.S. wanted to have war with Iraq. Iraq had already disarmed, but they said that the U.S. said that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. They had killed their own citizens, despite the fact that the Russians, the French, and China had vetoed the action of the U.S., say you cannot go to war. There's not enough reason here for you to go to war. We went to war anyway. So what we did, we wanted to save the Iraqi from being killed from Saddam Hussein. So what we did, we went there, we destroyed the whole country, and we killed many more Iraqis. And so why it happened? Because the UN does not have the power. The first thing is the U.S. vetoes, or other nations that have veto prohibit the action. Now, if, let's say, Iraq invades Kuwait, nothing happens there. People organize and we go to war immediately. Boom, boom. And there, in other words, when a nation is not member of the council or does not have the veto in the council, is liable to be destroyed because nobody will defend them.
So let me put this straight, because you were talking about 5 Security Council members. Help me here.
Okay.
We have the U.S., Russia, China, France, and England. Correct?
These are the 5.
So far, I have the U.S. invading a country, England invading another country, Russia invading Ukraine. Yeah. Did the French did anything on invading or?
Well, French in Africa destroyed. Well, Libya, no,
Libya.
They still have colonies, and they pretend that that's part of.
So there we have it with France. What about China and Tibet? I mean,
China and Tibet. That's probably the only country China did not use specifically the veto. However, they forced the Tibetan to agree to certain things, and it became a protectorate of China. But we know that for a country like China, they dominate the whole Tibet, and we know that the Dalai Lama went around the world, basically is in exile or was in exile. And so it's the same thing. Once a nation of the that have that the veto power, basically they can do anything, and the UN is rendered useless. And that's what it is today. Listen, the U.S. said to Russia, we are not going to war against you, but we are going to help the Ukrainians in 2022. So they respect one another, but the problem is that if you are not part of the veto nations, you're in trouble today.
So that brings me to the point of, okay, you demonstrate that all these failures happen, the UN happened. What about, let's talk about international law for a second. Well, international law, and it's supposed to be like the solution.
The international law is supposed to enforce the law, basically. However, if you don't belong, the international law is basically based on treaties between and among nations. If U.S. has a treaty with Russia for extradition or for anything, they can do that and exchange people. But if a nation does not sign a treaty, therefore you cannot say anything. Not only that, but the UN will say to the Russians, to the Americans, for example, you signed a treaty, you're responsible for the treaty. For example, the U.S. Worked for having a criminal court, international criminal court, but we did not sign the treaty, so therefore we are not responsible. They cannot charge us, and we cannot respond to their charges against us. So, and there are other nations that do not respect that. So, the international law, if you don't know about it, you feel that international law will do the work. But international law will be either enforced by the nations themselves that signed the contract or the treaty, or the UN. But the UN, as we have seen, it can be rendered null and void and useless completely.
So international law is separate from the UN. It's The Hague, right? Where is located? I mean, where do a lawyer...
No, it's part of... It's the criminal court is part of, it stays in Hague and it can open everywhere else, okay. But it's part of the UN. So it is UN that basically can charge a nation and say, you signed the treaty, so therefore... But I'd like to read I found a definition from the Find the Law on YouTube, obviously, and anybody can check it out. And look at what I found.
Wait. It's what is it that you're going to find? And you read us?
It's called Find Law.
Find Law. Okay.
Find Law. And I would like to read briefly, if I find it,
take your time.
What the international law. This is a definition.
This is a definition of international law.
Okay, and you can find it on my book on page 106.
Okay.
Public international law concerns the relationship between nations. Some nations are codified. Some laws are codified in a series of treaties, but others are not written down at all. There are certain rules and regulations. For example, having a war. War is legal. It's amazing, but war is illegal. Why? Because of tradition. Because it's not even written anywhere, but it is a tradition that a nation can have a war. And these laws are called customary laws. These are known customary laws, and nations consent to them by doing nothing. You don't have to do anything. You are free to do anything you want because of tradition. War existed 1,000,000 years ago, and it can still exist today because it's tradition. Since treaties are governed by international law, it's usual up to the individual nation to enforce the law. In other words, you do something against me, I go against you, but basically because you came to me, you're stronger, and I cannot rely on anybody else because, in fact, there is nobody to defend. Who can defend, for example, today,
Tibet.
Ukraine.
No, Ukraine. No.
The U.S. Most of the time goes, but we don't want to be the police of the world. Do you understand? Nobody has the responsibility. It's just that nations have to deal among themselves. But I came up with one solution.
So wait. So you're saying that international law, we cannot trust international
We
law?
cannot trust it either. So we cannot trust the governments, our own governments. We cannot trust them because they can do, and they can lie. They can lie anytime they want to. Look at, for example, Trump lied to us that he didn't lose the election. It was stolen from him. So people lie. And look at the lie that General Colin Powell perpetrated at the UN. The whole world listened to him.
Weapons of mass destruction.
There were weapons of mass destruction, and there was nothing. And they knew, and they should have known that with the previous war that we had
in Kuwait.
With Kuwait, we forced Iraq to disarm and to take away and to destroy. And the United Nations had already said there are no more weapons of mass destruction and atomic powers or anything in Iraq. And yet we went to war on those premises. So they lie left and right to us. And so here we have nations that lie to us and they abuse us, their own people. Iraqi people were killed and gassed by the German gassed also all the people. So there's this kind of violence. The U.S. treated Abu Ghraib, remember, in Iraq.
Oh, yeah.
So we abuse people and we use violence, our own people and with other people.
So how do we avoid, because it's you're saying that it's just a matter of who is bigger than the other, basically.
But that's the problem.
Who has the biggest guns?
Power makes right. That's the principle that still exists today. If you are not powerful enough, you may be subjected to invasion and all that. And that is why people are insecure and they fear that, look at the U.S. There's absolutely nobody above, better prepared and defended the U.S. than anybody else. And yet we fear that China may come into the U.S., that Russia may come into the U.S. That's ridiculous.
Iran.
But even Iran.
Even Iran, a small country that it has, a small country, but it doesn't have the power of the U.S. But we have a bigger problem, Vito, here. The bigger problem is that we have nuclear warheads everywhere in the world. How do we avoid that? How do we avoid using them again?
We have not been able to do that. Nations with Ronald Reagan signed a treaty with Russia to reduce the weapons of mass destruction or the atomic by the intercontinental missile with warheads. We reduced them somewhat, but we never continue with that. Now, at the UN, something came out. The non-atomic powers got together, non-power nations, they got together and they said any possession or manufacturing of atomic bomb or weapons of mass destruction are prohibited. But the UN, this is amazing because the U.S., which is the atomic power nations, all of them, the U.S., Russia, China,
England,
France, North Korea, they all got together and they voted against it, or they actually did not show up at all. So in a way, North Korea and the U.S. are together in trying to avoid the elimination of atomic powers, atomic bombs, because they are so fearful of their own country that they are not destroying, they don't want to destroy atomic bombs.
What should we do to avoid a future nuclear war?
Well, we have not come with that conclusion yet. I come up with something which I think it could work, but the problem is that we will be talking about next time. So maybe we leave that for next time.
Okay, so that's going to be our next episode. Recapping, I mean, in this episode, we learn a lot about failures, governments failing their own people, countries failing other countries,
The UN.
and the UN. And they were supposed to be the ones that solve this problem. So, in the next what are we going to talk about in the next episode? Give us a
Well,
clue.
in the next episode, we'll be speaking about basically the crux or the real meaning of the Ovum government, in which we'll state how we can prevent wars of invasion, wars of aggressions. I think I have a possible solution, and I hope that maybe the listeners can be interested enough to find out about the book. It's the Ovum government. And basically, the Ovum government, each government would be as an ovum, an egg, in effect, in a cardboard, where each one is protected from the other.
Okay.
That's about
Say
it
no more.
today.
We wait for the next episode. So thank you very much. We're here with Vito De Simone, the author of The Ovum Government. You can get it anywhere in the internet. Just search it and you will have it. So I see you next time. Thank you, Vito.
Thank you.